Welcome to Class 3, What is and What is Not Disability, Social, Medical, and Other Models of Disability. Disability includes anything from an invisible illness to complete disfigurement of a body, from a brief episode to a chronic condition, from sensory to mental or physical issues. An estimated 10% of the worldwide population are disabled, and if we live long enough, we all would become disabled in one way or another. We will be wearing glasses, having cancer, having high blood pressure, having bad knees, or being forgetful. Many authors and researchers have defined disability. Definitions differ for the purpose of law, education, public policy, accessibility, social benefits, human rights, and so on. In general, disability is any condition that impacts major life activities. Disability can be real or perceived, made up by non-disabled people. What is not disability? Disability has often assigned a medical meaning which casts it as a deviance from the norm, and not as a human variation. It also signifies that disability can and should be cured. Disability studies call for a shift from this perspective and introduce social, political, human rights, and post-structuralist and other models of disability. Here's a cartoon having a person in bed titled Disabled Activist Wakes from 10-year coma, and the person in hospital bed with people with disabilities around him and medical stuff around him. The patient says, "So have the academics agreed on what disability is yet?" Here is an overview of models of disability. First of all, we will start with social model. The social model of disability proposes that systemic barriers, negative attitudes, and exclusion by society, purposely or inadvertently, are the ultimate factors defining who is disabled and who is not in a particular society. It recognizes that while some people have physical, sensory, intellectual, or psychological variations, which may sometimes cause individual functional limitations or impairments, these do not have to lead to disability, unless society fails to take account of and include people regardless of their individual differences. The model does not deny that some individual differences lead to individual limitations or impairments, but rather that these are not the cause of individuals being excluded. The origins of the approach can be traced to the 60s and the disabled people's civil rights movement and human rights movement. Here is an image portraying the social model. In the middle of there's two circles. In the central circle it says social structures are the problems. In the circle around it, it lists different implications of the social structures, such as segregation, cultural and religious beliefs, social prejudice, and inaccessibility, that can be physical and institutional. And around the circle there are plenty of arrows that point to other disability implications of these social structures and the social model. It talks about ignorance, being underestimated, devalued, fear, stigma, inaccessible information, inaccessible transport, inaccessible facilities, lack of education, lack of employment, inflexible employment, sheltered workshops, segregated services, medical services and medicalized model, overprotected or being hidden in home by families, and lack of social network. So this is the social model in a picture. Here is some cartoons that were developed by people with disabilities, also showing social model. The first has a patient going to a doctor, and the doctor is telling him, "You have oppositional defiant disorder, sir. I prescribe a monthly course of therapeutic nonviolent direct action." Another picture has a staircase, and in front of it there is a person on a wheelchair, and there's a sign on the staircase on the railing that says, "Way in, everyone welcome." And the third picture has a person in a wheelchair and a blind person behind him with a hammer, and they have a little card and bunch of signs that they are throwing out. The signs say environment barrier, informational barrier, and attitudinal barriers. And the person in the wheelchair says, Disabled pride, cleaning up the environment. The next model we will discuss here is the medical and rehabilitation model. The medical model of disability is a model by which illness or disability is the result of a physical condition. It is intrinsic to the individual. It is part of that individual's own body. It may reduce the individual's quality of life and causes clear disadvantages to the individual. As a result, curing or managing illness or disability revolves around identifying the illness or disability, understanding it, and learning to control and alter its course. Tom Shakespeare, who is a disability activist and a professor, said the following on models of disability. I think that neither the medical model nor the social model provide the whole picture. Disabled people's lives are complex. Our limitations or difficulties of body and brain do cause us problems. Nobody wants their experience to be medicalized, but nor do we want to reject medicine. Equally, we want to challenge barriers and discrimination. In other words, people are disabled by society and by their bodies. It is the interaction of individual factors, impairment, motivation, and self-esteem, with external factors, the barriers, oppression, and expectations and attitudes of other people, which combine to create the experience of disability. The next model we will discuss is the charity and tragedy model. The tragedy and charity models depict disabled people as victims of circumstance deserving of pity. This and medical model are probably the ones most used by non-disabled people to define and explain disability. From tragedy and pity stems a culture of care. Although highly praiseworthy in many aspects, it carries certain dangers. Numerous charities exist to support and care for people with a particular type of disability, thereby medically classifying segregation, and often, as with the medical model, institutionalizing many disabled people. Given the choice, many, if not most, would opt for community life with adequate support. The idea of being recipients of charity lowers the self-esteem of people with disabilities. In the eyes of pitying donors, charitable giving carries with it an expectation of gratitude and a set of terms imposed upon the beneficiary. The first is patronizing, the second limiting upon the choices open to disabled people. Also, employers will view disabled people as charitable cases, rather than address the real issues of creating a workplace conducive to the employment of people with disabilities. Employers may conclude that making charitable donations meet social and economic obligations. Now I wonder, when you meet a person on the street asking you to donate money for people with disabilities, or to buy a keychain or other small cheap items to contribute to a collection for whatever people in need, do you usually participate? Do you buy such items? How do you feel about these street charity collections? What about TV charities, telephones? I want you to think about it, and if you wish, you can post your answers on Blackboard. Me personally, if I see someone selling something on streets, I do not buy it. I say that I teach in a special education classroom. I work with people with autism, and that I feel like I contribute more to disabilities and people with disabilities rather than buying a cheap item for $1. I don't feel like I would contribute to them as much. The next model is, I think I skipped the legal model. There we go. Next model is the legal model. The legal model is created by the existing laws and regulations surrounding disability in particular countries. Disability is defined as a psycho-social, physical limitation that impact major life activities. In the US, this model is strongly individualized. In welfare European states, the emphasis is on family and collective responsibility to care for people with disability. Human rights model has developed recently. It says that disability has come to be conceptualized as a socio-political construct within a rights-based discourse. The emphasis has shifted from dependence to independence as people with disability have sought a political voice and become politically active against social forces of ableism. Disability activists engaging in identity politics have adopted the strategies used by other social movements commanding human and civil rights against such phenomena as sexism and racism. Religious models use disability as a punishment inflicted upon an individual or family by an external force. It can be due to misdemeanors committed by the disabled person, someone in the family or community group, or forebears. Birth conditions can be due to actions committed in a previous reincarnation. Sometimes the presence of evil spirits is used to explain differences in behavior, especially in conditions such as schizophrenia. Acts of exorcism or sacrifice may be performed to expel or placate the negative influence, or recourse made to persecution or even death of the individual who is different. In some cases, the disability stigmatizes a whole family, lowering their status or even leading to total social exclusion. Or it can be interpreted as an individual's inability to conform within a family structure. Conversely, it can be seen as a necessary affliction to be suffered before some future spiritual reward. Economic model. Under this model, disability is defined by a person's inability to participate in work. It also assesses the degree to which impairment affects an individual's productivity and the economic consequences for the individual, employer, or the state. Such consequences include loss of earnings for and payment for assistance by the individual, lower profit margins for the employer, and state welfare payments. The economic model is used primarily by policymakers to assess distribution of benefits to those who are unable to participate fully in work. Post-structuralist model, finally. This model goes beyond the social model, which excludes the existence of impairment, and also beyond the medical model. In fact, people do lack abilities due to their medical and physical impairment, such as what Tom Shakespeare said in his book. Dealing with impaired bodily functions is an essential part of people with disabilities in their lives. It is not only disability, but it is also impairment that is socially constructed. So this model challenges a stable disability identity and says that identity is always fluid, it develops and changes. Here are some pictures of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his memorial in Washington, D.C. He used a wheelchair because he had a polio as a child, but he was able to hide his disability and the use of wheelchair during his presidential campaign because there was no TV. There was a controversy around the memorial because when the memorial was built, there was no wheelchair included. The big picture, the first image, shows him sitting on a chair with a big coat, and if you walk behind the statue, you can see a tiny little wheelchair sticking out in the back. Finally, in the 90s, during Clinton administration, they added a very small statue of FDR sitting on a wheelchair to add this identity to his presidency. I am wondering what model or models does the FDR memorial reveal? You can answer that to yourself. And if you want to read more about the controversy, here's a link to another article. Here are some examples of models on deafness. Both disability and deafness are handicaps only under certain social conditions. Deaf people have some shared experiences of disabling society. Bogdan and Biklan used the term handicapism that resembles Lane's term autism, discrimination based on hearing. Deaf people think of themselves as cultural and linguistic minority. They're like foreigners with their own culture. And here's some example of their culture and how they feel excluded. However, if there were only people who are deaf, they would not feel excluded.